All right.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It's nice to have so many people be interested in the topic that we are going to talk about tonight, and that is about the separated cycling network improvements and expansions in the cities of Waterloo and Kitchener, a project that we started a year ago, and this is the second public meeting on this project. But before I start, I'd like to say the land acknowledgement. The land on which we gather today are the lands traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Adawondarun, and the Chinatown people. The region remains committed to working together with the First Nation, the Métis, and Inuit communities on our path to truth and reconciliation. Please, the next slide. We will have a short introduction. I will give a project overview, the project timelines. We'll talk about the connections to the existing and future cycling network. We'll talk about the evaluation criteria, and we'll present the preferred design alternative. After that, you will have a chance to ask questions, and we will hope to be able to answer those questions. And we'll conclude with the next steps and the conclusions. Next slide. Just some housekeeping rules. Your camera is turned off, and I think only the panelists are on the cameras. If you'd like to ask questions, use the chat button to type your comments. And if you would like to speak, then use the reaction button and raise your hand, and the project team, someone from the project team will unmute and allow you to ask the question. And that will be at the end of the presentation. Next slide. Next slide. So my name is Cornel Mucci. I'm the manager of transportation planning with the region of Waterloo, and my focus is on active transportation. The project manager is here, showed up, Tom Humphreys. He is doing the day-to-day project management. And we have the consultants who were helping us to put together the whole project, do the design. Dave McLaughlin, the project manager, James Schofield, he's a complete street designer, Justin Jones, consultation lead, and there are many other members from the consulting team who are not here with us at this meeting. Next slide. Okay, so while the project that we are going to talk about tonight focus on cycling facilities, but it is not only a cycling project or a pedestrian project, active transportation project. It is actually a city building project. And the strategic plan of the current council is focusing on 4 areas: homes for all, climate-aligned growth, equitable services opportunities, and resilient future-ready organization. And the project that we are going to talk about is touching at least 3 of these pillars. Homes are important. The connection to homes and the connection to different land uses from homes for all ages abilities is also absolutely relevant. If we build homes where people can only drive to, that is not a good plan. So the transportation component is fundamental to a good city building. Climate-aligned growth. Of course, I mean, transportation can provide more pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, or transportation system can provide less. And whether it's more or less will depend on the type of transportation system that we build in the next 20, 30 years. This project is part of those projects in the next 20, 30 years, or actually in the next 10, 20 years, hopefully. And equitable services, currently about 40% of the population of the region cannot travel by car by themselves. These are the young people, the older people who may still drive, but actually it may be better if they didn't drive. Sometimes we wish our parents didn't drive, but they have to drive because that's how we built up our transportation system. Otherwise, they are locked in their home. We have those who have disabilities, who cannot drive. We have those who have financial constraints, and because of that, they cannot drive. And there is a fourth category, those who decide for whatever reason they don't wish to own a car or don't wish to drive. So that is about 40% of the population. For the region, that is almost 250,000 people. And transportation system has to accommodate for them as well. Next slide. The projects that we are going to talk about today were not born in vacuum. I mean, the plan for that has been set many years ago. And one of the previous master plans, the 2018 Transportation Master Plan, talked quite a bit about the need for sustainable, healthy communities and transportation choices. Now, the blue text here is more kind of a policy language, but if you go into the strategies, then you will see some of the elements. And that's where we talk about all modes of travel. So we are not designing transportation system only for those who can drive, but it should be designed for those who are walking, cycling, using transit or other modes of transportation. It also talks about the importance of active transportation under strategy number 2, and highlights the need to separate cycling from traffic. The crossings of major barriers is also mentioned there, and you will see this project is crossing a major barrier, which is Highway 85. And there are big challenges that are only partly resolved so far. The 80 network connections, active transportation network connections, are important because we have to connect the rest of the network that the city is building through their projects and the region is building through other projects as well. And the importance of connecting with transit is very important as well. Next slide. More recently, Transform Waterloo region developed a plan, the Climate Action Strategy. It was in 2021, which had very similar objectives as the Transportation Master Plan. But in addition to the Master Plan, it actually highlighted the importance of planning for the modal share of active transportation. We had targets for active transportation in the 2018 TMP, but the Climate Action Strategy actually increased those targets quite significantly. And again, it talks about all ages and abilities that we need to provide for. It talks about walking and rolling active transportation. They actually don't say cycling, they say rolling, which includes other modes of wheeled transportation, the new modes, the scooters, the kick scooters, and the other, I would say the legal means of travel on wheels. And they also, the Climate Action Strategy also points out the need to have all year-round maintenance. Next slide. We know that our community is growing. There are more people moving to the region. And the estimates are that we will grow by about 50% by 2050. That is significant growth. And that's a growth that we basically cannot change. And with that growth, we will have the growth of trips. This slide shows the daily trips that will change. And the question is that how do we accommodate those trips? Next slide. So this graph shows the distribution of trips, actually the modal share distribution. When I say modal share, I mean that the percentage of people who drive or travel in a car, that's the red part of the bar, the percentage of people are in transit vehicles or school buses, and the green part, those who are using active transportation. And you can see we have the 2016 data, because that's when the last origin destination survey was done. And we see that about 80–85% of us have been driving, if you look at the total number of trips. So a good percentage of us are driving. In 2031, this trend is expected to grow, the same trend, but you see that cycling is increasing, active transportation, we are expecting to increase it, transit is expected to increase quite significantly, but also car trips are expected to increase. Although the modal share is expected to decrease, but the total number is expected to increase. And there is still some reserve capacity in the region's road network, but that capacity will be eaten up. There will be no more capacity, significant capacity, vehicle capacity addition. We cannot build every arterial wider. We cannot add additional lanes. We cannot demolish buildings for obvious reasons. So at some point, the trend will have to shift quite dramatically. I mean, this graph is coming from the climate action strategy. And if you look at 2051, can you just click for the next one? By 2051, the car trips will have to decline, and not just in terms of the percentage, but in terms of the actual numbers. Now, this scenario showed that it would have to go down to half, and it was based on specific assumptions about the proliferation of electric vehicles. And this could be a different percentage, but the point is that the number of cars and the percentage of cars will have to decline to a significant degree. And the blue bar is transit. Transit would have to increase quite significantly. I mean, in this scenario, they showed 4 times more transit riders. And in terms of active transportation, this scenario shows 8 times or 9 times increase in the active transportation. And again, I mean, these are scenarios, but the important thing is we don't know exactly what will be the cycling, transit, or car modal share, but what we know that the car modal share will have to go down. And even if we don't do anything in terms of we just continue to build or travel the way how we did in the past, things will change because there won't be space on the road. Roads will be very congested. So the best approach to this problem is to plan for it so that the transition, the shift from one mode to another is smooth and much less painful, and it's not the congestion and the gridlock which is driving us to change the travel modes. Next slide. So why are we talking about more cycling and transit at the expense of car travel? It's pure physics or mathematics. One lane, travel lane of 3 meters or 3.5 meters can carry about 600 to 1600 vehicles per hour. In the urban environment, typically that number is 600. For example, Erb and Bridgeport have a capacity of about 700 vehicles on the east side of the freeway, which is about 10% more if you look at the number of people. And we have to look at the number of people that the corridor can carry. If we add transit in a mixed flow, then we can increase double, triple that number up to 3,000 people per hour. The same space, if it's used by cyclists, it is much more. It can go up to 8,000 or even higher. If it's a dedicated transit lane, again, it's similar number, or it could be higher. Sidewalk can also carry at least that many people. We are not talking about subways in this case. The point is that the reason why we have to look at other modes of transportation is that the car is a kind of a beautiful thing to do many trips to many locations. But at some point in the development of a city, the car is the least efficient mode of travel, it uses the most space. So its role must decrease, and it will decrease, I mean. Next slide. About this project, a little bit about the background of this project. This project started actually in 2019 with the pilot project in conjunction with the city of Waterloo. We had 5 corridors where we implemented the separated cycling facilities. And the objective of that project, pilot project, was to see if the separation of cycling on these streets where we had very little cycling, if the separation will help us increase the number of cyclists and attract new cyclists. And actually we learned that yes, the same thing happened in the region, the same thing what happened in every other city where they separated cycling facilities from motor vehicles. We had significant increase in the number of people, and people who would never cycle on those streets, including me, for example, on Columbia. I would never cycle in Columbia, but with that little separation that was there, I did cycle in Columbia, and that's what we heard from other people as well. So we went to council, we presented the results of this pilot, and there were 2 things that we learned: that yes, this is an effective way to increase cycling. And the second thing that we learned, that the way how we designed the pilot, and the pilot is always kind of quick and I would say quick and cheap and dirty, kind of what you can put together at a relatively low cost. But that design has a relatively high maintenance cost, winter maintenance cost. And the objective has been with this project, and that's what council told us, that we have to design the facility so that the costs of maintenance are lower. And they also asked us to expand the facility, not just to make these facilities permanent, but also to expand it. Next slide. Why separate these cycling facilities? Those who are cycling regularly or from time to time, probably they don't really need me to answer that question. But I still felt that it's important to say the reason why we separate cycling facilities is primarily safety. Cycling in mixed flow traffic is not the safest thing to do, especially if you have high volume, fast vehicles, and the fast vehicles is already 50 kilometers is considered fast, because if you are hit by a vehicle at 50, chances of survival are not so great. And what we also heard from public, especially the elderly, is that they don't prefer having cyclists in the same lane as they are traveling. They are afraid of hitting them, and cyclists sometimes do crazy things, and that is also pointed out to us. And from that perspective, separating cyclists, putting them into another space is a much safer and a much better solution for all road users. Only a small percentage of the population would cycle in mixed flow traffic, up to 3 to 5%. And we also know that most of the population, more than half of the population, is interested in cycling, but the way how we call them, they are concerned unless they are separated from vehicles. And this is not just for the region, this is pretty generic reaction from the public. So physically separating facilities is the most effective tool to increase the safety and the number of cyclists. And that's what we're trying to do with this project. The network of separated facilities is important, especially for winter cycling as well, because winter cycling is also possible if the facilities are separated. Otherwise, it is very, very problematic. And of course, as congestion increases and there are good cycling facilities, that is the safety valve. Many people will start to cycle because it will provide another alternative. And of course, that leaves space for those who wish not to cycle, who cannot cycle for whatever reasons. I mean, it still provides more space for them because every cyclist is basically less car on the road. Next slide. And finally, I got to the road diet. Road diet. Nobody likes diets. And maybe it's not the best way to call what we are trying to do in some of the corridors, but this is the language that we use in the TMP. And the reason why we call it road diet is basically that we have to find the space for the cycling facilities. Sometimes there is space in the right of way, for example, section of University Avenue. So we are leaving the existing lanes more or less as they are. But in some other corridors, there isn't space. So in those cases, we have to reallocate the space. And that is what we called in the TMP road diet, basically making the roads that is reserved for vehicles narrower. And in the 2018 TMP, both Bridgeport and Erb Street were identified for the diet. Next slide. Project scope. There are quite a few corridors in this project, and we group them into two categories. Some are by conversion, and when I say conversion, it is the conversion of the pilot project to permanent facilities. And the other sections are the expansion part, where there are no facilities today, and we are actually adding the new facilities. And I'm going to show you, don't have to read this. You'll see this on the map on the next slide. These are the corridors that we are studying here and talking or presenting to you tonight. King Street, for example, the dotted line means the section that already has cycling facilities, and the section which is solid is the new section. University is similarly the new and the existing section. And for those streets where we already had cycling facilities through the pilot, the decisions were much easier because we basically continue the type of facilities or the concept that we applied for the pilot for the ultimate. And when I say concept, that means that is it single directional, two directional, one side or both sides of the road. On Bridgeport and Erb, we only had a very short section in the pilot on Erb Street, which is the dotted line. So the solid line on Bridgeport and Erb, the long is basically the biggest change here. And I think the next slide is going to be the consultants.
Thanks, Cornel, and good evening, everyone. So I'll take it over from here. So just taking a look at the overall project, the key milestones that we've been through. We started this project back in the spring of 2022, and we've been working since then through a number of steps. So beginning with a feasibility study where we looked at different alternatives for introducing cycling facilities on the corridors that Cornel just described. We went to the public with a public meeting back in the fall of 2022 to present our design alternatives and to share our preliminary evaluation of those alternatives. Since then, we've been working on developing the preliminary design and the final design for these corridors. And that's what we're here for tonight, is to bring that final design concept to the public, to have a meeting to close the loop, share the outcomes of our study with you. And from here, the project will move on to council approval in winter of 2024. And then the implementation timeframe is still to be determined. And I believe the region will be speaking more to that at the end of the presentation. So in terms of the overall project and its connections to the existing and future cycling network. So the project, as was mentioned, is made up of a number of corridors. So Erb Street, Bridgeport Road, King Street, University Avenue. So those yellow highlighted areas are the study area. But you'll note that there's a number of existing or proposed cycling facilities that connect to the project. So we have other portions of King Street through Uptown Waterloo. We have the Laurel Trail and the Grand River Trail. We have Margaret Avenue over along the Bridgeport Erb corridors that makes a nice north-south connection. Other portions of University Avenue, Columbia Street, and Lancaster Street. So you can see that this is a project that's not working in isolation. They're not 5 isolated corridors. They're really part of an overall cohesive network that forms several important connections that will help to allow you to get around Kitchener and Waterloo using these connections. So some key considerations that we thought about throughout the project. Over at the east end, there's an opportunity to connect to the Grand River Trail system from the end on Riverbend Drive. There is existing signalized intersections along Bridgeport and Erb at Margaret that make for a nice connection opportunity to the north and south from there. And there's future and existing facilities on Margaret Avenue as well that we can tie into. In the Uptown Waterloo area, the intersection at Caroline and Erb, quite a complicated intersection with the LRT crossing diagonally through there. So quite a bit of consideration to how we get cyclists through that intersection, minimize the number of times that people need to cross over the tracks. So these are some of the key considerations throughout the project. I'm going to talk a little bit about the evaluation process. So if you were here at the first public meeting last year, some of this is going to be familiar to you, but the evaluation process is fairly complex because of the number of options that there are on Bridgeport and Erb, being a pair of one-way streets. How do we go about thinking about the best approach to implementing cycling facilities on those streets? So first, with step one, we thought about what's the best type of cycling facility for each corridor. Is it a painted bike lane on the road? Is it a multi-use path? Is it a separated cycle track? We'll talk a bit more about what all of those terms mean in the coming slides. Then in step two, should the cycling facilities be going one way or two ways? Because Bridgeport and Erb are one-way streets, does it make sense to have the cycling go the same direction as the traffic, or to allow cyclists to go in two directions on those streets? Step three, looking at what side of the street the cycling should be on. Should be the north side, the south side, or both sides. That was another consideration. Step four, looking at potential connecting facilities between those cycling corridors. So some of them I talked about, like Margaret Street and the trail at the east end of the corridor. And then step five, identify and mitigate the potential impacts of each design alternative. So one area that was the topic of quite a bit of consideration was whether to provide one-way or two-way cycling facilities, unidirectional or bidirectional. And there's a number of advantages and disadvantages to both of these approaches. In terms of unidirectional facilities, one advantage is that there's less conflict at intersections and driveways when you have cyclists just going in one direction, the same direction as traffic. Some negatives of the unidirectional facilities is that it does reduce mobility options for people cycling. So there's an increased risk that people might cycle the wrong way on a corridor. People naturally like to take the shortest path to get to their destination. So if we were to provide one-way cycling on Bridgeport and Erb, would people just be biking the wrong way on those facilities? Was something that we were a bit concerned about. The unidirectional facilities, there's also typically more space required, leading to higher costs because you end up with two independent one-way facilities instead of a single two-way facility, so it takes more space. The bidirectional or two-way facility, the advantage of that is that it gives the maximum amount of flexibility to go in either direction on the street. And the negative impact of that is that there is a slightly increased risk of conflicts at intersections and driveways. So it requires a bit more attention to the design details at those locations to help to mitigate some of those challenges. When we talk about separated cycling facilities, there's a few different types of separated facilities, and you may already be familiar with some of these throughout Waterloo region. So on the left, we have separated bike lanes. This is when we have a bike lane that's within the existing roadway. So like the pilot project facilities that were implemented earlier in Waterloo, these can be implemented with temporary or quick build materials. Think of things like concrete curbs that can be installed onto the existing roadway, maybe flexible posts or bollards to help delineate. but it's a cycling facility that is often retrofit within the existing roadway with some measure of physical separation to provide some separation between the cyclists and the adjacent motor vehicles. So it's something that provides some physical measures. It's more than just some painted lines on the road. Meanwhile, when we talk about cycle tracks, what we mean by cycle tracks is something that is actually above the curb. So often next to the sidewalk or at the same height as the sidewalk, but there's a curb separating that cycling facility from the motor vehicle traffic. So cycle tracks up above the curb, usually next to the sidewalk, and separated bike lanes below the curb within the roadway. Then the third option is a multi-use path. And that shares some similarities with the cycle track in that it is above the curb. The main difference is that a multi-use path is a type that is shared between cyclists and pedestrians. So cycle track is exclusively for the use of cyclists, whereas a multi-use path is shared with cyclists and pedestrians. So in the earlier stages of the project, we looked at a number of different design alternatives, especially for the Bridgeport and Erb corridors, which were the most complex parts of the project. And the way that we evaluated these alternatives was by looking at a number of different criteria. So these are listed on the slide here. We have criteria including traffic and transportation. So looking at how effective we think the design would be at achieving that cycling mode share shift that Cornell was talking about earlier in the presentation. What are the impacts going to be on motor vehicle delays or queuing, noise and air quality? We looked at safety and conflict mitigation, so between cyclists and vehicles, between cyclists and transit, conflicts especially at the Highway 85 interchanges, and also mitigation measures that could be put in place for all of those different types of conflicts. We looked at utilities, trying to understand if there were particular design alternative that presented more challenges in terms of, for example, a series of hydro poles being in the way of the desired location for the cycling facility. We looked at constructability, so how much effort it would be to build it and the complexity of that, and also at the cost of the cycling facility. So the cost to construct and then operate and maintain the facility. So these were all the criteria that were considered as part of the evaluation process and which ultimately led to the selection of a proposed design alternative. So the proposed design that we're presenting here, we'll go corridor by corridor and talk about each of them. So start with King Street. On King Street, what we're proposing is essentially very similar to the existing pilot project. So the pilot project is shown in the image up here at the top right. The pilot project used concrete curbs, flexible bollards put on the roadway to implement a cycling facility very quickly using those retrofit style materials. As King Street is reconstructed, the proposed plan is to take those cycling facilities and move them from the roadway up into the boulevard so that there's more separation from traffic and so that we narrow the width of the roadway. So you'll still have the same number of motor vehicle lanes on King Street, 1 lane per direction, and you'll have a center turn lane in the middle of the street. However, the cycling facility, which is currently in the roadway, is going to move up into the boulevard, and that's going to be achieved by taking the existing curb and moving it inward towards the center of the road. So the design has the cycle track in the boulevard adjacent to the existing sidewalk, has a buffer between the cycle track and the roadway. And you see the same configuration on the other side of the street, so cycle track and sidewalk. And these cycle tracks on King Streets will be unidirectional or one way, so cyclists traveling north on this side of the street and traveling south on that side of the street, just as it is today with the pilot project. An example of a typical intersection along King Street is shown here. So this is showing the intersection of King and Columbia, and you can see that we're going to attempt to make connections between all of the intersecting cycling facilities, such as the one along Columbia Street, using a type of design that you may have heard the term protected intersection. So trying to apply protected intersection elements to the design to make those seamless connections, make it easy for a cyclist who wants to turn left, for example, to be able to come along here, tuck into this corner, wait for the light to change in the opposite direction and continue along Columbia Street. So this is a typical intersection along King Street. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to share a link with the complete design drawings. So if you want to go and look into the details more, you'll be able to do so. A rendering of King Street showing the existing condition on the left and the proposed condition in the future on the right. So again, you see that existing on-street bike lane becomes moved up into the boulevard and the curb position moves inward. Same number of motor vehicle lanes, though. So it's 3 lanes existing and 3 lanes in the proposed future condition. Moving along to University Avenue. So University Avenue, it's a fairly, it's similar to King Street in that we're taking existing bike lanes that are currently on the road and moving them up into the boulevard by pulling the curbs inward towards the center of the road. So there's not going to be any change in the number of travel lanes on University Avenue. It will remain as it is today with 2 lanes per direction. We're looking here at the portion west of the University of Waterloo campus between Seagram and Westmount. So again, similar to King Street, we have an asphalt cycle track up in the boulevard. Sidewalk is next to it, and a bit of a buffer between the cycle track and the roadway. Similar condition over here on the other side of the street. We are suggesting that there be a short segment of 2-way cycling on this portion of University Avenue to provide better connectivity to and from the UW campus from Westmount Road. So there'll be eastbound on the south side of the street and a 2-way facility on the north side of the street here in this segment. And then as we move east along the corridor, so east of campus now, we again maintain the same lane configuration that we have there today. 5 lanes in total, 2 lanes each direction, the center left turn lane. And again, what we're doing is we're taking that existing on-road separated bike lane that was implemented as part of the pilot project here and moving it up into the boulevard, converting it into a cycle track next to sidewalk. So another drawing of a typical intersection here, this one showing the intersection of University and Seagram. You'll note that a number of similar design features as the King and Columbia intersection that I showed previously. You'll also note that there's integration with transit stops here, on both sides of the street. So there'll be a nice wide platform for people to get on and off the bus and where a bus shelter could be placed. And this is a rendering of the proposed design on University Avenue. So again, showing the existing on the left and the proposed condition on the right. So the curb gets moved to the right and the cycle track gets moved from the roadway up into the boulevard. When we come to Bridgeport and Erb, these were much more complicated corridors. And unlike University and King, where it was fairly straightforward to just take the existing design from the pilot project and carry it forward, we really had to think a little more critically about Bridgeport and Erb. And we came up with 4 different design alternatives for these corridors. So alternative 1 was having cycling on the north side of both Bridgeport and Erb, and continuing on the north side east of the Highway 85 interchange. Option 2 was being on the south side at the Highway 85 interchange, continuing along the south side along Erb Street, and then transitioning to the north in the Uptown Waterloo area. Option 3 was to have one-way cycling facilities, so westbound on Bridgeport, eastbound on Erb, and it would be on the outside of both streets. And in both options 2 and option 3, there was a connection here to connect from the north to the south. Option 4, instead of being on the outside of the road at the interchange, this option puts the cycling facility down the middle of the road at the interchange. And in this way, as a cyclist, you would have concrete barriers on either side of you as you're going through the interchange with traffic to each side of that barrier. And then it would continue along the middle of the road to where Bridgeport and Erb split, and it would stay on the inside of Bridgeport and Erb. So we looked at all 4 of these alternatives. We evaluated them using the criteria that I presented earlier. And when we came to the first public meeting last year, we had identified both option 1 and option 2 as the top 2 options to carry forward for further study. So at that point, at that meeting last year, we had recommended ruling out option 3 and option 4. Since that time, we've been doing quite a bit more analysis, having more discussions with technical stakeholders about the different options, also listening to the feedback that we received from the public since that first meeting. And option 1 has emerged as the preferred alternative. So option 1, again, is being on the north side through the Highway 85 interchange, continuing along the north side all the way over past Lancaster Street, and on the north side of both Bridgeport and Erb. If you're coming along Erb, there'd be a connection at Bluevale. So you would come along Erb, go on to Bluevale for a short block to get up to Bridgeport, and that's how you would continue along past the Highway 85 interchange. So looking at some of the pros and cons of option 1, option 1 kind of meets the project objectives of implementing that complete streets approach, providing that east-west cycling connection. It works pretty well at the intersections. It provides the cyclist safety by providing that physical separation, having a cycle track up above the curb in the boulevard space. The cost of option 1 was favorable compared to the other options, and no significant impacts to natural cultural heritage environments or to utilities. Some of the negatives of option 1, there's some potential conflict between transit vehicles and cyclists along Bridgeport, or rather I should say passengers getting on and off transit vehicles at the bus stops along Bridgeport. And there is, because of the bidirectional or two-way cycling on Bridgeport and Erb, there is a bit more attention required at the intersections and driveways to mitigate some of the risk of having two-way cycling on that street. And there are some, at some particular intersections, some additional delays for motor vehicles can be expected with this option. Looking at option 2 in a bit more detail, again, option 2 was one of the 2 options that we carried forward from that first public meeting. Option 2 was being on the south side at the interchange and on the south side along Erb Street. And there were 2 kind of sub options here to either continue along the south all the way to Caroline or to transition to the north at the Laurel Trail crossing and continue into Uptown Waterloo on the north. So that was option 2. Some of the advantages and disadvantages of that, some similarities here. So option 2 also met the complete streets approach that we're trying to achieve, provides that east-west cycling connection, works reasonably well at the intersections, similar safety. there's some argument that cycling on the right side of the road may be slightly safer than being on the left side. So a benefit for option 2 there. We still have some conflicts between people getting on and off the buses and cyclists with this option. We still have some complexity with the driveways and intersections, and we still have some delay with this option. So options 1 and 2 are pretty comparable on those points. There is a short unidirectional cycling portion through Uptown Waterloo with option 2, which introduces some potential for wrong way cycling in that Uptown Waterloo portion of the corridor. And so, as I mentioned, option 1 was ultimately what was determined to be the preferred. We heard from technical stakeholders, including Ministry of Transportation, that their initial preference at the Highway 85 interchange was to be on the north following option 1. This is still yet to be confirmed. Discussions with MTO are ongoing. The City of Waterloo's Active Transportation Advisory Committee voted in favor of option 1 as their preferred option. And from the public, there was a clear preference for option 1 in the feedback that we received since that last public meeting last year. And some of the themes of the comments were that people felt that it provided comfort due to the physical separation of the cycling, that it provided good connections to other existing cycling facilities, that it actually reduced the number of driveways that need to be crossed. I believe that's largely due to being on the north side east of Highway 85. There was feedback that members of the public felt that it was the safer of the 2 options at the Highway 85 interchange. And there was support for the fact that it would help to calm down traffic on Bridgeport and Erb. There's some feedback indicating that traffic today is quite fast moving, some speeding along those corridors. And in terms of having to cross Bridgeport and Erb to use the cycling facilities, with option 1, you're on the outside of the Bridgeport and Erb corridors, so on the north to the north and on the south to the south. And so that helps to reduce conflicts between cyclists getting on and off of those corridors. So a bit more on the feedback that we received since that first public meeting. 3/4 of people who responded emphasized support for the study. We're excited to see separated cycling facilities being added within the region. There was about 1/4 that noted concerns about the project. Particularly, themes were related to safety, traffic delays, disruption for commuters, about the current low cyclist volumes on some of the existing cycling facilities. Some people felt that there should be more of a focus on transit, but the feedback did emphasize a strong preference for option 1, although some members of the public did see benefits of option 2 as well. So some more on the feedback. Again, some of the same themes here. People who responded felt that it increased the sense of comfort for cyclists, provided good connections, worked well at the Highway 85 interchange. And some of the things that we were asked to consider as the project team moving forward were to look more closely at how cyclists can safely interact with motor vehicles at the intersections and at the driveways, to think about winter maintenance and how these cycling facilities would be cleared of snow in the winter, how to best delineate the sidewalk from the cycle track or the space for the cyclists from the pedestrians, how to, they asked us to consider traffic and roadway configuration impacts, and also to look at impacts on transit and how the cycling facility would integrate with transit, particularly at the bus stops. So we have a couple of renderings from the Bridgeport and Erb corridors here. So on Bridgeport, this is the existing condition looking east of Weber Street. So you can see that what we're doing is converting the road from 3 lanes as it is today to 2-lane configuration in the future, and taking that curb lane and using the space to introduce the 2-way cycling facility above a curb. the sidewalk behind the cycling facility. So this is the proposed design for much of the Bridgeport and Erb corridor. And then at the Highway 85 interchange, what we're proposing is that the existing ramps that are currently these free-flowing ramps with a yield condition at the end of the ramp, that they be converted to essentially a normal T intersection. So coming off Highway 85, you would come to a traffic light, replacing the existing stop sign that's there today if you're turning left, or the existing slip lane and the yield condition that's there if you're turning right. So the rendering here of the proposed condition showing that new two-way cycling facility, cycling crossing, traffic signals at the ramp. And so that's how we're proposing to get cyclists safely through those interchanges. And then just a schematic view of the interchanges. So the existing ramp comes along here and forms a yield condition. So we're proposing that slip lane be closed off and that all traffic be diverted to a T intersection as I described. So again, the cycling continuing east-west through the intersection, sidewalk there, and all traffic here would be governed by traffic lights. Very similar situation at both sides. So the west ramp over on the left side, the east ramp on the right side. Again, very, very similar configuration at both of those. Now, what I've been talking about so far is the ultimate vision. So what does it look like when these streets are eventually reconstructed and the curbs can be moved and the drainage can be adjusted and the cycle track can be rebuilt above the curb? That is, it's probably fair to say, a long-term vision for the corridors. In the interim, we are also suggesting a potential quick build retrofit design, which would essentially be an extension of what's already been done as part of the pilot project, where precast curb units and flexible posts could be used to convert an existing lane on urban Bridgeport to a cycling facility. So this is an existing photo from the pilot project there in the top right, and then proposed condition on Bridgeport here, on Erb here. Very similar, 2 drive lanes in each direction, and one of the existing lanes being converted to cycling. So as I mentioned, we do have an interactive board, and the link to this will be posted on the project website. You don't need to copy that down, although you can scan this QR code with your phone if you have the phone handy to bring up that interactive board. So if you're interested in taking a detailed look at the designs, you can go to this board and look around and see the complete design for the entire corridors on there. We're not going to go through it all interactively here tonight, but maybe I will just click on this link and bring it up to show you what you will see. So you'll be able to move around and look at all of the different elements of the corridors. So King Street, University Avenue, Bridgeport Road, Erb Street, and you can zoom in at any location and look at the details. I'll jump back to the presentation here. And I see that my colleague Justin has shared a link to the board in the chat window as well. So you can click on the chat button at the top of your screen and access that link if you want to go into there now and take a look around. But at this point, I will turn it back to Cornel to talk about timelines.
Okay, timelines. That is not my favorite slide. And I mean, as you see, the timelines based on the current financial planning of infrastructure projects puts quite a few of these projects a little bit into the future. I mean, projects, I mean, of this type are typically implemented in conjunction with other infrastructure projects, so that we have to change the pipes under the road, various utilities. That's when we dig up the entire street and put it back differently with the stacking facilities. The reason why we did this study was that we have the plans on the shelf. So if things change in terms of the timing, that we are immediately ready to go ahead with the projects. So the first project that is going to happen, or the soonest, is Lancaster Street, which is actually not part of this study. I mean, all the environmental assessments, I think, are done, or most of the planning has been done for that, and that's planned for 24. And I believe, yes, King Street is the next one, from University to Weber Street, and the other projects are coming later. There are two projects which are not, I mean, those the two red pieces there on Bridgeport, actually Earp Street, sorry. They are currently not included in any of the infrastructure rebuild plans, and I'm expecting that at some point they will be included, especially if the other part of Earp Street is built. Then we will not leave those gaps open there. Next slide. Conclusion and next steps. So please provide your comments. You can provide them on the Miro board, or there is also a survey on the Engage WR website. So if you want to be specific to some design elements, then probably the Miro board is better, but you can use either of the two channels to communicate things with us. And you also have the emails there of the project managers, of the consultant and the regions, so you can send those as well through those channels. I mean, you will have a recording of this presentation. And if you haven't subscribed, I mean, you may want to subscribe. And if there are some updates, then those will show up on the website, or we will be sending emails automatically when things happen. Next slide. And actually, we are at the end. Thank you for all those who stayed with us. And I think the time is for the questions and answers. And there are some questions already in the chat. So I'm asking James to start, and let's go through those questions, and somebody will respond.
Great. Thanks, Cornel. So I've been monitoring the Q&A and just seeing a few elements that have come in. We have answered some of the questions that came in, and I'll just quickly run through those before we dive into the ones that are still open. So there was a question about if we're doing public consultation for this project because it's a particular tricky bike lane, or if it's done for all bike lane installations. And just to provide that feedback that public consultation typically occurs whenever there's a significant change to an existing roadway. So that could be whether it's a widening, reconstruction, or the addition of cycling facilities. So there's been quite a bit of interest in this project, and so this is definitely one of those projects where we're looking to close the loop and report back to everyone on how the design alternatives were selected. There was a question in the chat about how and why the modal shares are not meant to change significantly until 2040, and Cornel just took a response to that one, that changing mode shift takes time. So it's going to take time to build the separated facilities. It's going to take time to have transit enhancements and change land use. So that's definitely a longer term type of change. There are some questions that are coming in that are relating to the connection between University and King, and the response there is that there is another project ongoing that's outside the scope of this particular study, and that's going to provide the connectivity between Albert and Weber, and that link is available in the Q&A panel as well. And then lastly, there was just a question about flex posts rather than solid bollards. So flex posts were chosen for the pilot because they are easier to replace. And there's also that the pilot nature of those as well, in terms of the using the flex posts. So that was definitely one of those elements. So there's a few different open questions, and so I think what we can do is we can go through some of them and see where we're fitting. One that I know James was going to respond to is there's a question about if it's planned that there's going to be a rolled curb between the sidewalk and cycle tracks, especially just given some of the potential conflicts that have been seen and identified by this participant between people cycling and people walking in Uptown. James?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So there are actually a number of details of this design that are yet to be resolved, and that will be resolved in future design phases. While we've kind of conceptually laid everything out geometrically at this point, there's still a lot to be sorted out in terms of grading and drainage and other considerations. And how the sidewalk and cycle track is to be separated is one of those details. So what I can say is that in the design, there is space for a number of different possibilities. One of those possibilities is that the sidewalk and cycle track be flush, be at the same level, and that there be some tactile or high contrast separation between the two. Another option is that there could be a curb separating the sidewalk and cycle track. And that's something that we'll be looking into, or the region will be looking into in future stages of the design.
Great. So I'll kind of go through the questions in order. So there was a question about the 57 and 100% increase in cycle trips during the trial period. And if we can quantify that in terms of trip volumes, I believe those figures are in the original report. So that is available on the region's website.
I believe this pertains to the pilot project.
Yeah.
Okay. I can respond to this a little bit more directly. Those numbers are small. I guess the question is about the absolute values, and they are in the low double digit in most corridors, which is actually the 3 to 5% of the population that is willing to cycle in such corridors. So it's quite normal in every city. I mean, when they start these projects, the number of cyclists is very low. They are really the brave souls who do that. And that's the point of changing it, because what the feedback that we get is that those streets are dangerous for cycling. And that feedback is coming from both cyclists and also from drivers. Drivers are telling us that move the cyclists away, this is dangerous for them. Move them to the sidewalk. And actually, we just cannot move cyclists onto the sidewalk, maybe in some specific cases, but typically no. So that number is low, and it has been low in every city, and that is the number that we want to change. And as I mentioned, the separation of cycling facilities or space for cycling is the most effective, and so far I think the only solution that we know which has such a dramatic influence.
Great. All right, thanks, Cornell. So the next question that I wanted to get to is one around if there's been a consideration to redirect through traffic to go around pedestrianized Uptown, or something that could be enabled to remove a lane of traffic. I think just what we would respond in this particular instance would be that would be outside the scope of this particular project. That's a I think a much larger discussion that would need to be happen at the regional and city level. That track.
Just to add to that, Bridgeport and Urb, we are reducing the number or proposing reducing the lane from 3 to 2. That will automatically reduce the speeds, the excess speeds closer to the speed limit. So there will be a positive effect on speeds and safety. Going to one lane, I don't think that would be palatable. And I mean, we are not recommending it. There is quite a bit of volume there of traffic, and we have to accommodate that. At least the thinking currently is that we cannot go further than or reduce it further than what we have done. But the 2 lanes is sufficient to accommodate the volumes because there are bottlenecks at the end. So even if there are 3 lanes, we won't be able to pump through more traffic with 3 lanes than with 2 lanes because the bottlenecks are actually intersections which cannot change significantly.
Mm-hmm.
The next one.
So the next one is a question about if there's a pedestrian controlled signal being considered for the intersection of Bridgeport and Goldbeck. I think Tom, you were gonna.
Yeah, there's when you look at the plans, there's nothing currently on there. However, that's not to say that it's not something we can't consider in the future. Certainly that's something we can take away and have a look at.
Great.
And please provide that comment on the engaged website or in the survey.
Mm-hmm.
For the record, because then we will definitely look at that.
So there's a question here about the slope and crossing King Street. So since King Street between University Avenue and Columbia is a fairly steep slope, it's inconvenient to have to bike all the way up and down if you want to cross King Street somewhere between University and Columbia. In the pilot project, was there a significant number of people biking in the wrong direction, and would there be crossings provided in between, similar to what's there on King Street between University and Central? Not sure if that's been considered.
No, it has not been considered. I mean, in terms of crossings at intersections, typically the control at intersection is driven by some warrants, traffic warrants. That's what we are doing. And yes, I mean, I did notice that people sometimes ride their bicycle in the wrong direction in the cycle track. I mean, that happens not just with temporary facilities, but with the permanent facilities as well, especially on King Street. I have noticed that. And the question is that how big that an issue is. We would like cyclists to go in the same direction or the right direction. Sometimes they do the other thing, which is not illegal. What we have noticed in other places is that with the growth of the numbers of cyclists on these facilities, it is self-enforcing, and eventually people will be riding in the same direction because it will be very uncomfortable and obviously wrong to go in the wrong direction. With low numbers, I mean, that may happen, and that will happen for a while. We don't think it is a huge safety challenge or problem. It is not nice. We are not designing for that, but eventually I think that problem will go away. Typically, it goes away when the cycling number starts to grow up to 100 or a couple of hundred cyclists per hour.
All right, great. So the next question relates to snow clearing and what the plan is for snow clearing on these raised cycle tracks. I would just say that that would be more of a, once the design gets finalized, is usually when that kind of starts to land.
Yes, I mean, it's important design decision. What we have done here is that we raise the cycle track. So the cycle track is not between two curbs. I mean, that's what we had for the pilot project, between two curbs. Removing snow between the two curbs is very expensive, and it needs lots of salt. And that's why we are going away from the design. We are raising it at the height of the sidewalk or a little bit lower, which means that we're trying to provide a boulevard space between the cycle track and the road, so that the snowplow could push the snow to the edge. And even if the cycle track is a little bit narrower during the winter, but we try to provide as much space as possible, and that is the snow storage until the snow is removed. But the snow removal will have to be less frequent compared to the pilot project, where we had to remove the snow after every snow event, and that is a very expensive maintenance operation.
Great. So some of the questions here that have been coming in, I think there's a few that are speaking to the idea of an interim solution or an accelerated timeline for these. Is that something, so there's, yeah, some that are asking if there's anything the community can do to help speed up the implementation, if there's consideration of the interim solution that could happen sooner than the timelines presented.
Okay, so sorry, I think the question is about the scooters and bikes and the potential conflict between those as the numbers increase.
Sorry, Cornell, I kind of skipped that one just to get to some of these ones that are more about if there is an opportunity to move forward with an interim solution rather than the reconstruction coming in 2028 2031.
Well, right now there is no funding for interim solutions. That is the problem. I mean, we have projects that are going to happen with infrastructure renewal, and that's where we are including these cycling facilities. If there is going to be funding for interim measures, then we would look at that, and we did develop through this project, we did provide plans for interim measures, which would cost less. But still they are kind of very similar to the pilot project, to that design, so they have higher maintenance costs. But as I said, currently there is no funding for those.
All right, so yeah, now we'll get to that next question, the one you were talking about. So if there's been any discussion around how to manage the congestion on cycling facilities as more people are using these facilities, especially as there's different speeds. So, e-scooters, e-bikes, traditional bikes going up steep hills, and whether or not there's that kind of passing where folks would rather move into the sidewalk rather than onto the vehicle lane.
Yes, it's a good question, but at the same time, it's not necessarily on the top of our agenda. I mean, the congestion in the cycling facilities rarely comes up, but the speed differential does come up, and I think that problem will be more serious as there are more electric bikes, especially the fast electric bikes, and there is actually the problem is that the decision how we categorize bikes and what is allowed, what is not allowed is a provincial thing. And we are trying to work with the province for the last 2 years to have a better categorization of bikes so that we would be able to say that only pedelecs with limited speed up to 25 kilometers or maybe 30 kilometers would be allowed in the cycling facilities, but that hasn't happened yet. And this is a much bigger problem, and which has to be resolved. And it's not yet resolved, unfortunately.
The other thing I might add to that, Cornell, is that one way to mitigate some of these issues relating to congestion and speed differential is to provide a facility of good width so that there's enough space within the facility for one user to pass another. And particularly along Bridgeport and Erb, it's a very, very generously sized cycling facility. So there will be that space to make those passing maneuvers. Even King and University are, I believe, wider than the existing facilities in Uptown Waterloo. So it should be a little more comfortable for people to be passing one another as they need to.
Yes, I think the minimum width that we are looking is it 1.8 or 2 meters, James?
I believe it's 2 meters throughout
Yeah.
most of the corridor.
Yes, and some of the first cycle track on King Street was, I believe, 1.5 meters, which is not necessarily enough for passing.
Perfect. So yeah, I think that wider facility will definitely support that. So the next question is, and there's actually a couple here that I think are directly related, James. So will Bridgeport or the cycle tracks use the buffer to ramp up traffic to cycle track level, or will they be more of a wavy experience at driveways and entrances for businesses? So, and then that feeds right into another question that was, has raised crossings at smaller roads been considered? So having the consistent cycle track across intersections and driveways. I think we can lump those two together.
Yeah, those are great questions. And I know what you're referring to as a cyclist myself. The waviness of going up and down over every driveway is not ideal. And again, this will be something that will be refined in later stages of design, but the intent, yes, is that most of the grading and the sloping of the driveways is within that buffer space so that we maintain the cycling as flat as we possibly can through those areas and try and minimize that wavy effect. And then the other question was related to looking at raised crossings at some of the side streets. So keeping the cycle track and the sidewalk elevated at the side street crossings and having vehicles ramp up and over the cycle track and sidewalk. And again, this is something that can be explored further in detailed design stages, but I think that is something that is certainly on the table.
And we are exploring that concept in some other corridors, which will be built sooner. We call it the continuous sidewalk or continuous pathway or continuous cycle track. So basically, the cars are the guests in the spaces. It's a kind of a speed hump. And we will be experimenting with that in the next couple of years. And probably by the time we get to some of these corridors, we will have a much better experience, and we hope that we will be implementing that at some of the crossings.
Great. Perfect. That's good. There's a question in the chat about bollards versus flex posts, but I think we'll just kind of move past that and emphasize that the facilities that we're recommending would be curb separated, not bollard or flex post separated. So that would be, I think, provide that degree of physical separation.
Yes, we are going away from bollards. Bollards would be used only in temporary solutions, but otherwise in the permanent solution, we are going away from bollards. They are expensive. When they are hit, if they are not replaced, they are ugly. So it's not a good design.
Yeah, going toward that that curb separation is a preferred design. So there's another question about the interim condition on King Street north of Columbia to Weber. I think that I'm not sure if that's in the same category as the previous ones or if that's related to a different project. But I think that would be outside the scope of this one.
No, I mean, we are not considering to do it before 27 because the design actually for the permanent is, I believe, going to start next year. So it takes some time to go through the design and build it.
Okay.
Okay, Tom,
I'll just add to that.
something to add?
Yeah, I'll just add to that as well, that typically when we have projects like this, which will be it'll be a reconstruction of that section from Columbia to Weber, things like utility changes are likely to start happening in 2026. So if we were to put in an interim solution, it's going to be affected. It's probably going to have to be changed or removed prior to us implementing the full, the final project. So for the money that it would cost to do an interim solution, and I can fully appreciate the desire to do it. Actually, that money can go towards the project and the final design.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thanks, Tom. So there's just a question about what has been the experience of having cyclists level with pedestrians in Uptown. I'm curious about how this aspect of the design will play out on University. I think that James, do you want to take that, or Cornell or Tom?
Yeah, I can take it very quickly. The current thinking, well, we haven't resolved this separation between peds and cyclists totally. The current thinking is that in areas where you're expecting less pedestrians, then we would have the flush design. And the reason why the flush design is that it's much easier to maintain. You can use a snowplow to run both on the cycling facility and sidewalk and clear it. If it's raised, there's a high difference, then it's a better separation between the pedestrians and cyclists, but it is more complicated for winter maintenance. So probably in Uptown and areas, we will have a little bit of great separation, but in other areas, Bridgeport, probably it will be level. But that is, as I said, we are working on this, we're discussing it, but by the time we get to this project, we will resolve it, because things are coming up next year already to resolve the problem.
Great. So there's a question here about if there's a way to add trees between the cycle tracks and the roadway, or if it's not recommended to put trees so close to the roadways. Generally, yeah, not having trees so close to the roadway is usually you're not going to have a high degree of survivability if the trees are that close to the roadway, and you're going to introduce a lot of potential swerving and pavement cracking. So that would be, I think, kind of our experience, but I don't know if the region has any guidance around that.
In the past, the practice has been not to put trees. We are discussing how to change that, because we need to put trees in corridors. But this is part of the next project, next corridor design guide, which we start very soon. But we haven't resolved that in this project. That if maybe that will influence the design of this if we work that through.
Yeah.
But it's we recognize the trees are nice to have in streets.
Trees are very important. It's a matter of where they fit in the streetscape, and often what we're seeing is that they are more situated and oftentimes are happier and will grow healthier when they're in that space between the cycling facility and the pedestrian facility, or in the boulevard themselves, rather than right against the roadway.
Yeah.
Depending on the median width you have, of course.
Yes, when will council vote on this? We are planning to have a report to council in January, probably end of January, maybe February. And yes, delegates are welcome. Whether you're supported or you're critical of it, you should show up.
Great. So that was the question there about if council will be voting on it. So yes, it will be going to council. So has there been consideration for providing more queuing space at the King and University intersection, especially at the southwest corner? There's no queuing space, so left-hand turning cyclists would block the path on a red light.
Okay. I think I believe what you are referring to. The space is what is there. I mean, we can't really create more space. The way how these facilities, the protected intersections work, when the number of cyclists start to increase, is that some cyclists will wait at the curb line, and if and the others, if there is a long queue, they will be waiting behind the sidewalk or behind the crosswalk, the crosswalk which crosses the cycle facility. You can see that I mean that travel behavior evolves over time, and I mean in any city where there are lots of cyclists, and typically that is kind of a social norm. It becomes very soon.
So I'm cognizant of our time. I know we're just a couple minutes to 8 here, but I think we've only got a few questions left, and so I think if folks are all right, we can probably truck through them. So thanks for that response, Cornell. There's a question about if there can be green colors on all the cycling facilities instead of just at the intersections. I think that's definitely something that could be considered as you get into detailed design, but I'm not sure if that's within the.
I can share what is the thinking with the color. In the Netherlands, they use aggregate, colored aggregate, so they don't have that never fades. They don't have to repaint it. I mean, we typically don't use colored aggregate. I'm not sure if it's available or not. So what we could do is paint these facilities, but I can tell you that painting is very expensive, and maybe we have the funding the first time when the facility is built, but in 3-4 years down the road, when it has to be refreshed, repainted, when it becomes very ugly, then typically there is no funding. So it's a huge funding challenge with repainting these facilities to green. So the question is that where do we spend that limited fund? And so I'm not sure if it will be the green paint or trying to do more facilities, separating facilities. But definitely we want to emphasize the white paint and have the specific white paint and the elephant feet, those squares, big squares, to identify clearly where the cyclists are crossing the road at an intersection or driveway.
Okay. So there's a couple of different questions in here, just mostly about the interim, and I would say that, you know, the interim solution that's been kind of put into this is something that could be, you know, advanced if there's a desire at council to provide funding. But for you know, crowdfunding an option is a question that's come up, and how could future funding become available sooner? Are there grants or reprioritization of how regional budget is distributed? I think those are questions that are outside the scope of this particular project, but certainly something that would be worthwhile for the region to consider as you go forward.
Yes, the regional budget is, there's a public discussion on regional budget, and you can provide those comments. And I mean, that is a good input for those who are developing the budget.
Great.
Crowdsourcing, I'm not aware of any city doing that. So if there is any information on that you could do some crowdsourcing, it's pretty expensive to build these facilities. So I'm not sure that crowdsourcing would be a good tool, but there could be some things that we don't yet know.
Yeah. And there is a question just about what the interim solution might cost, just so that there's an understanding of what those costs might be. So that's something that I think could be reviewed.
I don't have the answer to the
yeah,
cost.
I don't think we have that answer right now.
Difficult. So we have to do more work to identify those costs.
Yeah. So there's a couple open questions that I think are relatively quick to answer. So the one is that you've mentioned mitigating the conflicts between motor vehicles and cyclists. Does this refer to the number of conflicts or also the severity and the velocity of these conflicts? It's both, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. There's things that have already been shown in the design, such as tighter corner radii that will help to reduce the speed of turning vehicles. And there's other things that can be looked at in later stages of design, such as raising the crossings at some of these intersections. And
Mhm.
as Cornell mentioned, going from 3 lanes to 2 on Bridgeport and Erb will naturally also slow the speed of traffic, which will have some safety benefits. So it is both.
Great. And then there was just a question about using a multi-use path if there's low pedestrian volumes. And I would say that was reviewed, but it's definitely less of a preferred design for these kinds of conditions. So I think what we'll do there's a couple questions related to kind of detailed design and some of the intersections and just reflecting on the fact that we are a little bit over time. But I do just we'll close off with this last question and I, don't be discouraged if we're not answering your questions live. Some of these, the ones that are coming in are quite, they're getting into some of the weeds on this, which is great. But the last question is, will the decision about the additional sections like between Columbia and Weber on King be voted on separately in council? And I guess that's just a question for regional staff, if it's being brought as a package. I'm not sure if Cornell or Tom, if you'd be bringing the design as a package or if you're bringing it as individual sections.
For King Street, essentially, we will be bringing this report for the entire, for all the corridors in January. Now, when it comes to the design of King Street, actually, I don't know the answer. Whether we will have to do another public consultation. Tom, do you know the process?
I'm sorry, these will be brought forward early in 2024, and there'll be discussion. There will be, further detailed design, but whether that's brought forward to council or not, I'm not entirely sure. That'll be our partners in design and construction who would take that forward.
Yes, really, I don't have the answer to this question, because the way how we are setting this project up, doing the functional design in advance for so many corridors, this is the first time that the region is doing. So I don't yet know what will the process, because typically after this stage, we are giving it over to design and construction, and they will be doing the detailed design. And whether they take it to council or not, whether this will be enough, I don't know the answer to that question.
Great. So I guess in response, stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned and then come to the council meeting in January and February and provide your comments, and maybe that will be an opportunity to ask for another meeting or opportunity to provide feedback. I don't really know at this point.
Great. Okay. So with that, I think what we'll do, there's a question about if there's a date for the future budget meeting. Tom put a link to the budget consultation in the chat there, so I'm sure you can probably subscribe to that project page, and you'll be able to keep up to date on when they're doing the budget consultations and where there's those budget meetings. So be sure to subscribe to the page there for the budget consultation for 2024, and that'll be your best bet for that project. So with that, we are at 8:07. So I think what we'll do is we will thank everyone for their time and their feedback. This has been really great to hear so many detailed questions and to see such strong interest in this project. And we are looking forward to wrapping it all up. So thank you so much for attending, and we will bid you good evening.
Goodbye.